are talking The Marshes. This one is the directorial debut of Roger Scott, who also wrote this movie, and it is Australian, essentially a slasher movie. And the story focuses on these three scientists that are doing some type of kind of work within this marshland within Australia, studying the water. Along the way there, they kind of encounter a couple of rednecks who they have a little bit of an altercation with. However, when they're at this marshland, there seems to be some type of malevolent presence within the reeds that is intent on killing anyone that comes in their path, and ultimately there's kind of fear and terror. Could it be this urban legend of this kind of cannibal that has roamed the area that is stalking them? You have to watch the movie to find out. So let's discuss The Marshes. What works, first of all, with this movie? First thing I'd say as a point of difference is that one thing I enjoyed about the movie is our small group of protagonists aren't your typical type of protagonists that you have in a slasher film. These are two very professional scientists and one kind of like intern type guy. But nonetheless, they are consummate professionals within their field, and they somewhat act like that. Aside from one thing, which I'll come on to, but I appreciate the fact that these weren't kind of your dumb teens or young adults just kind of like partying and doing dumbass stuff in the middle of kind of nowhere. I mean, we're told that they're like, you know, very far out in the kind of the middle of nowhere. There's no phones, etc. But I like the way that these are presented as professionals in their field, and they do kind of act like it, and they're not acting like typical kind of like, you know, fodder that you'll get in slasher movies. I have to say, I thought the acting by these three actors was also very good. I mean, these don't appear to have a lot of credits to their name in regards to acting credits, but I've got to say, I thought they all did a pretty damn good job in acting very much like their characters are supposed to act, and you would imagine people would act in kind of real life. I also have to say here that the movie has a kind of certain haunting quality with these kind of like this vast wastelands of marsh and things like that, and there's lots of kind of establishing shots of the various kind of wildlife, maybe a little bit too much, but again we'll come on to that. That gives it this kind of like this eerie feel of complete kind of isolation. The movie also has some themes of different types of thinking. You know, our characters are meant to be, you know, scientists are very logically thinking, but they succumb to fear, paranoia, and the kind of the threat of the unknown, and ultimately lets their kind of imaginations kind of get the better of them at certain times, and maybe are a little bit more accepting to things like urban legends. So I thought that was kind of quite a neat touch within this movie as well. The scenes of horror, which to be fair come fairly late in the game with this movie, are also look particularly painful. Without kind of spoiling anything for you, because this movie doesn't have loads of kills, it really kind of saves out for the final act. What we do see is, although it's fairly graphic, the thought of what's actually happening and the way it's portrayed, filmed and acted makes it seem particularly painful to imagine. As you were watching this and you're thinking, oh god, that looks bad. So I thought that was very well done. What doesn't work? Okay, so this is the director's first feature film as a kind of a director. And I've got to say, I feel it shows some areas where needs to be kind of worked out. There's a little bit of over-reliance on establishing shots, as I've mentioned. Also, the director seems somewhat obsessed with dream sequences, and I do not think they are particularly well integrated within the movie. And it goes a little bit like, okay, I get it, there's lots of dream sequences, and some of them are kind of many of those cases where you think it's the reality, but it's actually a dream, etc. And I don't know, I thought it ended up making the movie somewhat convoluted. Now, as I've mentioned, despite the fact I feel these characters are portrayed as professionals, they still do end up having some things that I felt were a little bit kind of a stretch of an imagination. In particular, as an ill-judged romance between our female scientist and the intern, which it seemed to come out of nowhere, if you want my honest opinion. There didn't seem to be much kind of build up to it, and then all of a sudden they're bonking. and they just seemed, for someone who seemed to be very professional, and by the beginning of the movie, it sounded like they were getting a promotion, seemed like it would be a unprofessional thing to do. And then just things like kind of typically running into the reeds and stuff like that on your own, getting separated when, you know, that there's no real need to. And then with the actual killer itself, it is just a guy, but I feel that they've made him a little bit too overpowered in a way. Like, we're meant to believe that this guy can track you via scent. I was like, what is he, a dog? I mean, this is the marshes. It's not as if it's like a sterile environment where, you know, smells are going to stand out and things like. There's things like this that just seems a little bit silly, and like, what's he doing literally out here in the middle of nowhere? Where does he live, and what are you potentially hunting in this kind of vast wasteland? I mean, there's like they just happen to be some people there at this point, but what about any other time? Again, it just seems a little bit hard to believe in certain areas. The movie as well, I feel, takes a little bit too long to kind of get going to the actual more horror stuff. There is a little bit of fake outs. And yeah, it just maybe I would have kind of started the tension a little bit more. Maybe have a little bit more of a kind of a B plot involved in it to make it a little bit more of an involved plot, perhaps. I haven't seen the movie Wolf Creek, but I can imagine this being an Australian kind of slasher movie. There will be inevitable comparison to that. Like I said, I haven't seen that movie, so I really can't say too much in regards to how it compares, but definitely does have that Ozploitation movie feel to it. Overall, it comes out as a pretty average movie. I think there are some elements here that do work very well and some good ideas, but the execution, I feel, needs a bit more work. Now, this is obviously the director's first feature, I believe, so maybe with kind of like later efforts, he'll, you know, improve the craft. But it's certainly not a bad effort. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.